Today we are honored to host three experts on this topic. We have Brian Estrada, Associate Dean of College Counseling at Providence Academy, Art Rodriguez, Vice President and Dean of Admissions and Financial Aid at Carleton College, and Deborah Johns, Associate Director of Admissions at Yale University. I would like to extend a warm welcome to our panelists on behalf of the Navigate 2020 event sponsor, GoToCollegeFairs, and thank you so much again for taking the time to present on this important topic. Let's begin.
Thank you, Scott, for that kind introduction. My name is Brian Estrada, and it is a real pleasure to be on this panel and to be joined by great colleagues and leaders like Deborah and Art. There is much more than can be covered about highly selective admissions in just 40 minutes plus Q&A. And what we hope to accomplish here is to approach this topic from the ground up. First, bringing some data to the question of how one even defines highly selective when speaking of college admissions, and to have a helpful discussion about the experience of applying to these colleges that is rooted in how admissions offices at higher levels of selectivity do their work and think about applicants. There may be students viewing this session who have anticipated applying to highly selective colleges for a long time. And I think that all three of us also hope that some students may be viewing this session who may wonder whether highly selective institutions could fit into your future. So we certainly recognize that the notion of applying to very selective colleges can be really intimidating, and having better information won't necessarily make the admission rates any higher, but it can help the experience to be more understandable to you and to help you chart your best path through the college application process. So the first question to take up is really what is meant by highly selective colleges and how many colleges are in this category. And the first question, so this term highly selective says something about the percentage of applicants who are successful in the admissions process. And it also says something about the academic qualifications of those applicants. And so if you use data from the National Center for Education Statistics, there are 115 colleges out of 2,400 four-year institutions in the United States with admit rates that are under 50% and whose typical student scores in the top quintile of college entrance testing. So that is 115 colleges out of 2,400 institutions. Again, it's a surprisingly low number, perhaps. And these are the institutions which could be considered highly selective. In other words, so colleges are highly selective for our purposes if they receive many more qualified applicants with strong academic credentials than they have room to admit. And there's at least two obvious takeaways from this. First is that there can be colleges of really high quality that do not happen to receive the superabundance of highly accomplished applicants that leads to a really low admit rate. There are clearly way more than 115 fascinating and amazing colleges in the United States. But the number of applications received is not a synonym for academic quality. Second is that these institutions, these 115 institutions, are not evenly distributed in the country. Far from it. One thing to keep in mind is that every college, no matter where it is or how selective it is, will see more than a strictly equal share of students enroll from its local region and the nearby cities where greater numbers of people are familiar with the institution. I will cite a college that I once worked in admissions for, that being Dartmouth College, as an example. Dartmouth is in New Hampshire, and 18% of its most recent entering class came from the New England region, the 6 New England states. Now the percentage of the US population that lives in New England is 4.5%. So New England had 18% of the entering class at Dartmouth against 4.5% of the total population of the United States. So that's telling you something about college enrollment patterns that I think is important. On the student side of the equation, the mean distance from home that most students travel for college is a little over 100 miles. So as a college counselor, I have to share something that I know every college counselor is quick to share with students, that being that balance is very important as you put a college list together. And it remains important to focus on the college options that fit your situation and your interests, and perhaps even your home region and kind of the geography in which you're conducting your college search. Even as you do maybe aspire to apply to highly selective colleges that may be quite far from home. A final point that I want to make here is that you can't speak of highly selective colleges as a homogeneous group. This category includes public research universities. It includes mid-sized private research institutions like Yale, liberal arts colleges like Carleton College, military academies, religious colleges, and polytechnic and STEM-focused institutes. And when we talk about how the admissions process is conducted at such a diverse range of schools, we should expect that there's going to be tremendous diversity in the way these institutions go about selecting students. Colleges care deeply about an applicant's fit with the mission and offerings of their institution. And that means that as a potential applicant to these types of schools, there's really important work to be done on your end prior to applying to make sure you understand your fit for any one or more of these environments. And that it's very unlikely that your fit is found in all of these various environments. That would be kind of difficult to imagine. So doing some work on the front end is important. It's not just the selectivity or the excellence that you should be attracted to as you build your college list, but also the fit. Now there are some broad themes that tie together this very diverse world of highly selective institutions, and those are what we want to explore in this session. Those themes being that while academic strength is always very important, the case for admission at highly selective institutions is almost always going to be built from the other factors present in an application, those being extracurricular accomplishments or intangible characteristics, or especially intellectual endeavors beyond the classroom. This is what one dean of admission, Lee Coffin at Dartmouth College, distinguishes as the data and the voice. And it's about much more than the data. Also, another theme is that the application process at highly selective colleges emphasizes effective writing, and that preparing those written components of the application distinctively is something that takes time and careful thought. And we want to make sure we leave you with some thoughts about that. And then the last thing is that understanding the process, the admissions process itself, especially the odd language that is used, the different decision plans that are out there, and the different ways that the process unfolds in these selection processes is very important and can make for a more successful journey. So with that said, I want to go to our next block and turn it over to Deborah.
Thank you, Brian. Brian, you will be moving the slides along, correctly? Right,
That's
correct?
right.
Okay,
Yes.
Awesome, thank you. So beyond academic credentials, what other factors matter and how do they matter when we review applications? And yes, the focus of this particular session is called highly selective admissions, but anyone who uses what is called whole person review or holistic review. These are the things that we will take into consideration as a college, as a university, depending on what you are in terms of your definition. These are the things that we will pay attention to when someone applies. So the next slide, please. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to spend a few minutes talking about what it means in terms of holistic review, or what some institutions call whole person review. Because I think what people need to understand is in these arenas where we get thousands of applications, we could probably fill our class 2 or 3 or 4 times over with the number of applicants that we get, we're trying as an admissions committee to answer 3 questions for ourselves. And in a whole person review, we need to look at lots of different places and spaces to answer those questions. So the first question that we ask in a whole person review, where every piece of required documentation helps us answer these questions. So the first question that we ask is, can the student do the academic work here? Can they thrive in our environment? And where do we find that? Well, of course, we find that at on the high school transcript, because through the high school transcript, and we're always looking for evidence, and we're always looking for contextual information and evidence that provides us answers to these questions. So the transcript, I've worked at 6 different institutions. It's always been the most important thing that we go to. So we look at the transcript, we look at the classes, we look at the progression. So rigor and succession and all of that matters in terms of answering that question. We'll also get evidence from what your teachers and counselors tell us about you in terms of your classroom. So that gives us evidence about, can you do the work? Can you thrive here? And in my own experience at the institution I represent, about 75% of the students who apply to my institution can do the work. So that's great. That's great. Statistics have told us, fantastic, you can do the work. Then the second question we ask is, we ask, what will you add to our community? We're all looking for a diverse and interesting community with people who love to learn from lots of different backgrounds. Great. So how do we get to that? How do we find that out? Again, we're looking for evidence, and that's what the applicants can share with us through their extracurricular activities, through their choices of courses, through their things that they do in and outside of class. Do they have family responsibility? Do they work? Are they involved in their faith community? Those are all kinds of things that will give us a sense of what they do currently. Well, what could we see them doing on our campus? What particular communities do they align themselves with very closely? And so essays, recommendations, extracurricular activities, those kinds of things, those all give us evidence on how they will add to our community. And at each of the institutions, of the ones that Brian mentioned, and of the 4,000 plus colleges out there, we're all sort of seeking to build a community of scholars. And so that gives us lots of information. And then the final thing that we look at in terms of this whole person review is, we're looking, each of the admissions committees that I've been part in my 30-something years of doing this has asked, what can we see in our mind's eye what the student will do while they're on our campus? Like, can we see them, how can we see them project out in 4 years? Will we create an environment where this student will thrive, or will this student just tread water? Will this student always just never feel entirely comfortable? We're trying to figure out, what can we imagine the student's trajectory to be while they're on our campus? And again, those things are answered most by the things that I mentioned before. It's the way you present yourself in your application. You give us context from, you know, your life story. It's where how you've been engaged in your high school, but maybe you're more engaged in your town or your city or your suburb. It could be that you're very active with your faith community. It could be that we could see that you have such a passion in a particular academic field, or you have a particular talent, and combined together, we're like, oh my goodness, this person will absolutely eat up the environment that we have at those at our respective institutions. And so it's, can they do the work? What will they add to our community? And then what can we see them, how can we see them grow as XYZ student at our university? And those are the questions that we always ask with whole person review. And it means that everything matters in the process. High school transcript, recommendations, essays, extracurricular activities, interview if that's offered or required. and college counselor recommendations. It's usually 7 or 8 different touch points that we will be looking at along the way to answer those 3 questions. Thank you.
Something that I would add is that, you know, when you look at this, these boxes that are on the screen, you know, some might call these boxes angles, like application angles, perhaps. And I struggle with this term because it sounds very reductive, like your humanity is reduced to the small number of ways that an admissions committee can understand you. But I think it is important to arrive at some self-awareness before starting to apply, before starting on applications. Arrive at some self-awareness about which of these areas are naturally occurring in your life. It could be that you are someone who really finds joy in intellectual endeavors, or in leading big groups and big projects outside the classroom, or that you have some big, you know, passion projects that really draw you in simply because they are fulfilling. It's not going to be all of these things, you know, and that's something that's probably something to make sure is clear. But you should figure out where, again, what's occurring naturally, and then try to lean into those things. And you can lean into that dimension, and you can stand out from the crowd if you do. And even if that doesn't lead to your application being accepted, and with low admission rates, there's always a chance that it won't. Your application will come closer to conveying who you actually are, which is the point. Should we move on? Okay.
So I'm going to spend some time talking about writing in the process, specifically as you think about highly selective institutions. As Deborah and Brian shared, you know, we're trying to grasp and understand a student's potential and promise when they arrive on our campus. And we know that in our courses, in the classes that students will be taking, there will be a significant amount of writing, you know, whether it's freshman writing seminar that a student has to take, whether it's courses in humanities, social sciences and sciences, in STEM areas, writing and conveying your thoughts and ideas will be really important. And so we're going to spend some time talking about how you can write about yourself, share information about yourself in the application to really convey the type of individual you are, and allows an admissions officer, an admissions reader to begin to gather information about you. So Brian, if you want to move on to the next slide. So there are really 2 components of writing that we are reviewing as part of your application. One is the essays, which you have control over in terms of how you respond to them, the content by which you're providing in those essays. But we also get recommendation letters from counselors and teachers, academic references that allows us to ascertain from an outside sort of perspective, from sort of a third party, what you're like in the classroom, and what they share and convey about you is also equally important. I want to spend some time talking about the student essays though, because I think that there's a lot of students get really anxious about student essays and whether that will make or break an admissions decision for them. And I always tell students, as you think about the essay, the thing that's really most important as part of this process is that you should be really comfortable with what you're writing about, what you're conveying about who you are. And ultimately what we're trying to ascertain through the process and reading your college essay is understanding you. You know, our communities, our classes, the types of engagements you have with other classmates and students at the college comes back to you as that individual. And as we're creating these communities of individuals, having a better idea of you, I think allows us to make, you know, really good and strong choices about how we're connecting you with our campuses. But at the same time, I think really supports the notion of fit as something that you're determining and thinking about as a student as you're going through this process. And so we want to make sure that the essays allow for you to be able to do that. So some things to think about as you write your essays. most institutions or many institutions that are highly selective utilize the common application. And one of the virtues of the common application is the fact that you can begin thinking about writing your essays, because the essay prompts that will be available for this coming year's application cycle are already announced on the Common App site. And you can begin to read them, think about them, decide, maybe which one or two you're comfortable with responding to, and that you might be able to write about, so that you can share information with admissions officers about the things that matter to you. And I think it really provides you both the opportunity to share insights about you, but also maybe how you've come to understand yourself and other things that you really enjoy. With supplemental essays, I think every institution, or just about every institution that uses the common application, also has some form of sort of short essays that you might respond to. Many of these try to elicit from you why you're applying to our institution. So why Carleton, why Yale, those are pretty typical as part of the process. But sometimes colleges provide prompts that really are seeking and looking for sort of creative responses to a prompt that they provide. So one, for example, University of Chicago is infamous for asking questions, short answer questions that really sort of push students to delve into the creative side in responding. And I was actually just visiting their website today to give you an example. So like one of the essay prompts that they had on their website is cats have 9 lives, Pac-Man has 3 lives, and radioactive isotopes have half-lives. How many lives does something else, conceptual, actual, have, and why? So like that's one of their essay prompts. It's atypical, I would say, for many colleges to sort of provide these really creative prompts. But it's a way for them to try to understand your way of thinking, how you might respond to that, and also sort of placing yourself in that intellectual environment that University of Chicago is very much known for. And so I think you should view the short college sort of specific questions as a way for a college to truly try to understand you as an individual, as a student, as a person, and again, how you might connect with that college or university. I also want to talk about teacher and counselor recommendations briefly. The way that we begin to fully create a picture of you, the student, is that your essay provides that initial step. The essay is something that we read early on in the application, and really recommendation letters sort of supplement what we're reading through your responses. Teachers and counselors know you very well in very different settings, in the classroom environment, in the community environment. And we're asking them to share information about you, about how you engage others, how you work with classmates and peers, how you delve into academic situations, or how you delve into things that you're passionate about. And so that very much is a way for you to think about who you might ask to write these recommendation letters on your behalf and what they might share about you. You're not going to know exactly what they'll write about you, but I think you'll have a good idea of the way that they view you in the classroom setting based on maybe conferences that you've had with them, notes that they write in your, essays or assignments that you do about how you've engaged a particular subject matter. And so reflect on and take time to reflect on some of those pieces, because I do think that that's very important. We're going to jump on to the next slide. And I want to touch on some key takeaways for writing. I think what's really important when you're going to begin this process is that you should take time to really plan and think about your responses to these questions. Oftentimes, admissions officers can quickly sort of see where a student didn't take that effort and time to be thoughtful and respond in a very deep way, in a way that sort of allows us to understand that you have some deeper understanding of our institution. And I think that that's important to make sure you have adequate time. Don't try to rush through an application and get it submitted all within 24 hours, because just that sometimes just doesn't work very well to convey you. I also think it's very important when you write not to lose your voice. You know, we want to know you, and I want to really emphasize this. You know, we're trying to understand you. You know, your parents, teachers, friends, and others who might provide you with advice about what you've written. Like, you want to seek that advice. You want to write drafts of your essay, but don't lose your own voice. You know, that's really important to this process, because that's driving how we're thinking about you. I also want to say that you should think about the process as a way in writing an essay, is that you want to be mindful of the fact that there isn't a right essay out there, meaning that we see a variety of different types of essays from different students on different subject matters, you know, some that are very personal, some that are humorous, you know, some that really sort of share some side of them that may not, in some individuals' eyes, may not sort of be seen as something that illustrates more information about a student. But, you know, we take this in context. We take your essay in context with the rest of your application, and that helps us build that stronger and better understanding and picture of who you are. So make sure that when you write, you know, maintain that voice, and make sure that you're spending time to really be thoughtful, and also think about even those short answer questions. You know, think about the time that you're spending to ensure that you're being thoughtful for those short answer questions as well. Stop there.
So these are the final block of the structured portion of our presentation, and it's all about the process. And when it comes to the way the admissions process works, and like I said earlier, even some of the terminology that's used, you know, there are some things that that maybe some students know or sort of can quickly come to understand about the way the admissions process works, and then but there may be students who don't have that same context or that same sort of rich access to information about the admissions process. And I think that there are certainly factors that are really important to understand, and some really specific considerations. And I will say, as a counselor, that the top one on this list, the presence of early application options, is a very important one. And so Deborah and Art, would you, I think, each maybe speak a little bit about, because your institutions, as two examples in this highly selective category, two different early programs that each of your institutions offer, would you speak about it?
Sure. So we have, at my university, we have what's called single choice early action, and it is a restrictive program in the sense that you can only apply to us early and not any other private school's early program, either early decision or early action. And there are variations of restrictive programs throughout the United States. So you would have to go on one's website to learn about early programs and if there are any restrictions. The caveat to our particular restricted program is we restrict it to private institutions, but you can apply to any public institution across the United States, regardless of their program. So, you know, because, for instance, they can still apply to University of Michigan's early program and still apply to Yale's single choice early action. That deadline is, you know, again, I would review websites and deadlines on each admissions website. For us, it's November 1st. You would find out by December 15th. But with an early action program, you are not bound to attend Yale. You would still have up until May 1 for us to make a decision, because we want students to be able to compare different packages and such. And then we have a traditional regular decision program, and that is January first or second, sort of depends on when it happens during the week. And then you find out in April your admission decision, and you have, again, up until May 1st to make a decision.
Yeah, and I'll add briefly, at Carleton, we have an early decision program, and it is binding. So students who apply early decision, and there are 2 rounds that we have, either the first round or second round. When you apply, you are signing an agreement stating that if you're admitted, that you'll withdraw applications from other institutions. And so if you're considering applying early, particularly to an early decision school, what I typically recommend to students is that they do ample research. Try to understand who the institution is. Can you see yourself at that institution? Are your future classmates students that you can see yourself wanting to live with for the course of 4 years, wanting to learn from, be in classes with, socializing with? And so all that really comes into play. So I would take the time to try to explore as much as possible these institutions before making that commitment, because at least for an early decision program, it is a commitment. There is a caveat to early decision, that if a student applies early decision and financially it's not manageable for a family, institutions will release students from the binding early decision agreement. But in those cases, we make it very clear to students and families that we first want to make sure that you're talking to our financial aid office, so that we are fully understanding a family's financial situation before we may release a student. But if it comes down to the end where it's just not manageable, we'll release students. But I think it's with the understanding that you're doing, as a student and family, significant research to understand sort of both the social, cultural, and academic side of the institution, but also asking yourself that question: is this financially feasible for us too?
So on the question of athletics, going back to the point about the diversity that exists within this highly selective category, I mean, you have institutions that are at the highest level of NCAA Division I college athletics, and they recruit student athletes in this super structured way that's managed by the NCAA, and they give significant athletic scholarships. And then you also have certain conferences, athletic conferences, that are at the Division I level, where perhaps there are no scholarships, but still a commitment to a really high level of competitiveness. And also some of these schools really sponsor a large number of programs, such that the number of students in the entering class who may be enrolling at this school with an intent to compete in athletics is not a negligible percentage. And then you have at the other levels of athletics, especially Division III, a number of highly selective institutions with, again, really relatively large athletic programs and commitments to athletic excellence, but combined with sort of academic excellence as well. So what I really want to answer the question of is, if you're someone who is a committed athlete and maybe is wondering how to even move in this direction towards competitive athletics at maybe a place like Yale or Carleton and the institutions in those constellations, what would you say they should do?
So, I will take this first, and I will say, the Ivy League is a Division I program that students will play at a high level, and they will be recruited by coaches and such, but there is no athletic scholarship. So, that's something to keep in mind, although you do receive an excellent education. I think one of the things to keep in mind is, I always say that if you believe you have the talent to be recruited at the Division I level, That's great. You should be in contact with the coaches early, and early isn't early senior year. Early is earlier in your high school career, depending on the sport. And that, you know, the coaches do their recruitment of their own talent specific to program, but at the same time that you're learning about, do I want to play for this particular team and work for this particular coach for the next 4 years, you should be spending equal amounts of energy and time through the admission websites and admission people that you can meet to make sure that the institution itself is a great fit for you, has the programs that you're interested in, is a place that you think you would, as I said earlier, thrive as a student. You know, sometimes students will get really, really excited about Yale, and the coach is really, really excited about them, and then they want to study business. And I'll say, that's all well and good, but we don't have a business school or a business degree at Yale. And so, to me, there's a little bit of a disconnect that they haven't spent as much time on our website looking at Yale through our lens. So if you're a recruited athlete, or you think you could be a recruited athlete, you need to be looking through both of those lenses, both through the athletic program and coaches and teams lens, but also through the admissions lens and our own, all the information that we provide on our websites about academics and such at our respective institutions. I'll also say real quick that at a Division I level, just again, you can play incredibly competitive athletics at the Division III level, but the time commitment, being at the Division I level, it's 12 months a year. It's a significant commitment. And so that should be something to be mindful of as you're looking at schools.
Yeah. You know, much of what happens at Division III athletics, I would say, is similar to what Deborah described. And I think for a student who is an athlete and wants to participate in varsity level athletics, you know, I always recommend that a student should begin the conversation with coaches. You know, they're the best, in the best position to tell you, you know, what their team needs are. They can connect you with other athletes on the team so that you can get a really good feel for the culture and environment within the team itself. You can begin to form a relationship with the coach and understand how they think about coaching and the way they support students on their teams. And so start with coaches. I think that they're going to be in the best position to provide you the sort of information you might be seeking as a scholar athlete, as a student athlete on any of our campuses.
So there's being mindful of time. There's a few things on this slide that might come up in Q&A, but I don't want to speak of athletics without also speaking about other ways that students might really be excelling, and especially those areas that are in the arts, and knowing firsthand from my own experience working in college admissions that admissions offices are particularly interested in when students are excellent musicians, artists, actors, filmmakers, that there's actually ways to demonstrate your talent via the arts supplement. So would you all speak to the you know, to the ways that artistic submissions work, and if a student thinks that they might be in a position to submit one, what should they be thinking about?
Yeah, I'm happy to share some thoughts on that. I think, you know, as Brian mentioned, as institutions, you know, we're looking to really ensure that students are engaging all of our academic programs, whether they're the arts, in the social sciences, in STEM areas, and that's important for us. And so students who have significant talents in artistic areas, visual artists and musicians, should feel free to submit a portfolio as part of the process. The Common App uses a service called Slide Room for students to be able to submit those portfolios, and our websites provide information about the type of portfolio sort of information you might submit. I would explore them. And what typically takes place, and I believe this is true for both Carleton and Yale, is that our faculty will review your portfolios that you submit. In cases where there is demonstrated talent and our faculty get really excited about the students that they come across, you know, they will let us know that you might potentially be able to have an impact on our program, that you might be able to add to the depth of our program in some ways similar to the ways that athletes might add to an athletic program. And we're utilizing that information in our process as we review candidates for admission. It's one other bit of information, some other ways in which we know students might have a direct connection to programs on our campus, and that becomes important in our process. And we want to make sure that students with those talents are a part of our community in equal ways that students from other types of backgrounds and experiences are also connecting on our campus too.
I have nothing, ditto to everything that Art just said. We do the same thing as well. So slide room is your friend, and I would say use it. You know, there are institutions that will ask you for science research that way as well. So just keep that in mind. And in most cases, at the most selective institutions, we are relying on the experts in the academic realm. So we are definitely reaching out to faculty to review those items that you send to us.
Okay, so that's going to conclude the structured portion of the presentation, and we were encouraged to come up with a couple of questions for ourselves to kind of get this Q&A portion started. And I know we want to accept some questions from the chat as well, but I think we have to take up at the very least the first question on this slide. About the COVID-19 pandemic and all of its related disruptions and the impact on the selection process that it may have at institutions like Carleton and Yale and many other colleges as well for the 2020-2021 admissions cycle.
Sure. So, boy, you know, if this is where you want that ball that you can look into and you can see the future, and the future is clear and you know exactly what's going to happen, even next week versus next month or in 2 months or in 5 months or in 9 months. And, you know, I think that for each of us, I think one of the things that you will find is we're going to be really open-minded and adaptable to whatever way that you'll be able to present yourselves through your application, because your transcripts will look different because of this spring. Your extracurricular activities will look different because they've been altered because of the spring and probably the summer and into next fall. You know, so I think there's a lot of things that we're going to be saying, we're going to take what you give us, we're going to take it at face value. We're going to know that you have been hit with the same kind of curveballs as the rest of us, and that you've done the best in the situation that has been provided to you. I think the good thing is many of us on our websites have been really clear about what we're going to be doing, at least for this upcoming year. And, you know, for my particular institution, the one big change right now is we have always said we recommend subject tests. If you've taken them, they're optional, you can send them along. And this year we're saying, please don't send them along. We're not going to review them. They're really not going to be part of our process this year. And that's a 1-year policy, and we'll review next summer to see if that's something that will be changed or not. But for this coming year, that is our policy. So that's the way that we have changed specifically so far. But we already know that in viewing all those other things that I mentioned, that we are just going to have to put on different hats and expectations associated with what is presented in front of us.
I would also add just a couple other things. I know that for institutions that use the Common Application, there will be a space on the Common Application for both students and counselors to be able to share how their lives or institutions were impacted by the pandemic, and that will allow students to have a different space other than their essays or even the additional information section to be able to write about COVID-19, so that if you don't want to write your main essay about the pandemic, sheltering at home and all the other things that we've had to do as a result of that, you don't feel the need that you have to do that. And we also know that this will provide an opportunity for high school, secondary schools to be able to share with us some of the changes they made to accommodate a shift in learning, a shift in teaching, because we know that this has all had a significant impact on our lives. I would also echo what Deborah said, visit websites. I think we're all doing our best to update our websites to make sure that it reflects, maybe new policies for the coming year or changes to the process for the coming year, and that will be an important step. One change that Carleton is making specifically around testing is that we have decided to go test optional for this coming year, because we understand that there's some uncertainty about the availability of testing. The testing agencies are doing what they can, but I think to really remove that equation or that sort of concern out of the process for Carleton, at least, we decided to make it optional for this coming year. So I think that is significant, and I think that many institutions are making or have made similar announcements. And so I think that you can decide based on those decisions that institutions and colleges have made, how you might spend time thinking about your application, and what you might need to get done in order to apply to the colleges that you want to apply to. Oh, can I add one more thing? One of the questions that I've seen come up, so Scott, I'm going to preempt you just a little bit. One of the questions that keeps on coming up is about students taking gap years or deferring their enrollment this year to next year, and what that might mean for college and universities. I don't, what I can share right now, at least, for Carleton, and I think that this is similar to what I've heard from other colleagues, is that at this point in time, we're not seeing sort of that huge surge in gap year requests from students. In fact, we only have a couple more gap year requests than we had last year, sort of during a more typical admissions cycle. Even if we allow more students to take gap years next year, I think our plan is still to try to enroll a sort of a full additional class of first-year students, because we may have other, maybe enrollment challenges with either returning students who may take leaves or have leaves already because the uncertainty around what might happen this fall. That there's still going to be room for students who want to apply to our colleges, and I think we're going to be able to accommodate students. And I can imagine institutions will share more about what their plans are. But I would say, from sort of my anecdotal information and conversations I've had with colleagues at other institutions, it doesn't seem like that huge surge in gap year requests or deferrals has come yet. But I realize that much of this may be dependent on the choices and decisions colleges make about being able to be on campus this coming fall. And I know some have announced and some are still making decisions about what that might look like for their institution.
I would say we actually have seen a little bit more gap year activity at my institution. So, I mean, it's not an overwhelming amount, but again, I would be interested to see how, as we make definitive plans for the fall, how those numbers change, increase, or possibly decrease, depending. And as Art mentions, we do have some current students who are, considering leaves of absence for one reason or another. So.
Well, that's great insight there, and I really appreciate you sharing that as well. We will continue to answer questions here for another 5 minutes or so. I will remind everybody that this is being recorded so that they can come back to this later on and go through those through the slides and play it again. So just, I know that's been popping up. People were asking those questions. The next question I wanted to go into is you brought up and demonstrated how colleges are taking a look at a holistic view. It seems like, and people have asked it in a number of different ways, but they're really, I think what they really also want to know is, are they getting compared and looked at holistically if someone comes from a very different background, such as a small rural school versus a large school where they think they feel that there's more opportunity. Maybe some of the small schools in this example that they gave doesn't offer AP courses or very limited AP courses. Could you talk about how that is looked at on a holistic view?
Sure, I'll take a stab at this first, Art, and then please, jump on in. And it's always about context, and we sort of think about this as we're not comparing an applicant against X applicant against Y applicant. We're looking at X applicant within the environment and how much they're in, and how much they've taken advantage of the resources that are available to them within that environment. And so our expectations are always based on what the student's life experience is and where they are and what they have access to for a lot of different reasons. Some students have tremendous amounts of access to lots of different things, and then other students have little to no access. And so we only place the expectation of what's in front of us and what the student can do within that particular environment. And so we're just, it never would potentially hurt a student to be from a more, less resourced high school that we can't expect them to take 8 or 9 or 12 APs when there's only maybe 0 or 2 offered. But have they dug into those 2? Have they taken those 2 APs? And have they, provided themselves that little bit of challenge? And those are the sort of things that we would take. So we always think about context and what is available to the student, and we wouldn't hold it against the student if they are in an environment where they've learned more about mechanical engineering by fixing, I'm using this as a random example that I heard MIT use actually in a program I was doing with them, when one of their admitted students learned more about mechanical engineering by fixing all the equipment on the farm, by trying to figure that out and not taking the elaborate coursework that was not available at their particular high school. Kids that have like this serious, curious, passionate interest in science and been able to do some really cool things, but not have the resources to have these, crazy research opportunities at their high school or within their counties or within their states because the resources are already there. So we're always sort of accommodating for that when we're reviewing candidates.
Yeah, there's no need for me to add any more to that.
Excellent.
Oh, good.
So interviews were mentioned as part of the admissions process. Are they always a part of the admission process for highly selective universities? And if so, what advice would you give for college interviews?
It depends on for each institution. Some highly selective institutions have opted not to include interviews as part of their process. Some have. Because we might learn some additional context from those conversations that helps us in the review of applications. Some interviews are evaluative, some are informational. So again, I think it's really important to check with the institution that students are considering applying to and try to understand how interviews are utilized in the process. I think interviews are really a great way to for students to share more about themselves in sort of a kind of less formalized, rigid process like the application. It allows the student to really sort of dig deeper on something that they might really find, that they're passionate about. And sometimes that could be a little bit challenging to sort of convey that through the written part of the application. And so having an interview, I think, allows for that. Colleges utilize different individuals to do interviews. And I think that students should be aware of that. You know, some colleges have students who are seniors conducting interviews. Others might have staff, admission staff, who are conducting those interviews. And still others might include alumni interviewers. And regardless, I would say, of that type of interview that you might have, whether it's with a student or an alum or a staff member, you know, we're all seeking and trying to really ensure that we're trying to collect similar information across, you know, those variety of different pathways for students to have those interviews, so that it can really accentuate our process, so that we can learn more from a student based on that conversation. Again, that sometimes we aren't able to grasp or be fully informed about as we read through an application. So visit college websites, you know, see what they recommend. And I would definitely suggest having an interview if you think that you're interested in an institution, because it could really add, again, some level of depth and nuance to what you've written about or have shared in the application itself.
Yeah, well said, Art.
Well, at this point, unfortunately, we've run out of time, and this concludes this expert presentation entitled Understanding Highly Selective Admissions. And I want to thank our panelists, Art, Deborah, and Brian. Thank you so much for giving your insight. And I want to remind everybody to come back to the event page at any time to watch the recording. It does need to get time to be processed overnight, so it'll be there for you tomorrow. Thank you once again. I'd also like to remind you to explore your college options in our virtual college fair. We have hundreds of interactive virtual booths where you can watch videos, download materials, and even chat live with admissions representatives from that institution. You'll also find that some booths have a schedule of their own live stream presentations. So make sure you visit that today or come back while the event is still live to enjoy those experiences. Thank you once again. Have a great rest of the day.